Imagine you're trapped in Nazi Europe in World War II. You might be a captured soldier or a bomber pilot who's been shot down or a refugee. Your survival now depends on your ability to escape. But how do you evade capture in unknown terrain?
Somebody yelled out Germans, and we were absolutely frozen stiff. 50% fear and 50% cold.
Tens of thousands of men and women staked their lives following routes that became known as the Freedom Trails.
That's freedom up there. You're not quite home yet. These routes through enemy territory led to safety, but many were extremely perilous.
Si è rischiato tantissimo. Dal primo fino all'ultimo non ne lasciavano uno.
To find them required the help of local resistance fighters who risked their own lives to save others.
Un italiano che salvava gli inglesi veniva fucilato sul Stato.
I want to retrace these routes that have since become legendary.
Now we're in the mountains proper.
Discover what it took to escape.
Pretty claustrophobic space.
And meet the ordinary men and women who became heroes in the process.
You helped me to safety. You're a wonderful, wonderful person.
This time I'm in the Rossano Valley in northern Italy.
On the 27th of December 1944, 33 members of Britain's elite force, the SAS, parachuted into this location. Their mission was to be one of the most daring of the entire Second World War. They were to infiltrate deep into enemy-held territory, create disruption, chaos and confusion, and then successfully withdraw over the high peaks and knife-like ridges of the Marble Mountains.
In 1944, the SAS was sent to this valley to conduct a highly dangerous but strategically vital mission.
The mission was known as Operation Galia, and the idea was to draw enemy forces away from a virtually impregnable, heavily manned barrier to the south, known as the Gothic Line.
The Gothic Line was a monumental barrier built by the Nazis to defend against the Allies. And I've come to the last remaining intact piece of it.
This few hundred meters of nondescript wall next to a busy road is all that remains from one of the most formidable defensive barriers in the history of warfare.
By 1944, the Allies were advancing up southern Italy. But they couldn't continue without finding a way past the Gothic Line.
It stretched for 320 kilometers. It was 15 kilometers wide, and it was designed for one thing alone: to stop the Allied advance in its tracks.
Today, most of what remains of the Gothic Line is underground.
This is the entrance to one of the tunnels that leads to one of the gun emplacements, and there would have been thousands of these along the length of the line. In we go. Into the heart of the hill. I'm pretty lanky, so I'm not really designed for this, but no one is. It's full of right angles for a reason, really easy to defend, difficult to attack. As I walk these tunnels, you get a real impression of the scale of the Gothic Line. This was a subterranean labyrinth, and of course you had structures above ground as well. This was a labor force of biblical dimensions. 80,000 people took a year to create it, most of them slave labor and coerced into doing so. If you take it out of the context of war, you have to have grudging admiration for an awesome feat of civil engineering. Well, this is a gun emplacement, and in here you would have had an anti-tank gun, and the gun would have been wheeled out, and it would have given it a perfect view. So to orientate you, that's south. and that's where the Allies were coming from. That's north, that's where the Germans were based. So this was the line here, and the idea was the advance would come up this valley. Got a big rock face there, you got a big mountain there. This is a pinch point. It's a bottleneck. And so anything like tanks or any vehicles, anything heavy, any artillery would have to pass through here. It would hit that barrier, and then alongside the barrier here would be an anti-tank gun just pounding it. That is a killing ground. It's a killing zone. So this wasn't just an architectural and engineering marvel. There was also some brilliant military thinking behind it as well.
It was behind this defensive line that 2 days after Christmas 1944, the SAS men of Operation Galia flew into Rossano Valley to carry out their mission. Under the yoke of fascism, the North harboured an underground anti-fascist movement where Italian partisans were working undercover to support the Allies. And it was here that the SAS were heading.
The SAS arrived in 5 Dakotas, flying low over the valley. And then deployed, they parachuted out. But unusually, they did it during the day. And this is why. This is a leg-breaking landscape. If you look at it, I'm surrounded by steep slopes, rocky paths, fence posts, trees. There's forests everywhere. And the chance of injury when deploying in this landscape in a parachute at night is very, very high indeed. So they had to deploy during the day. But there was another reason as well. Even more unusually for an SAS parachute drop, they wanted the Germans to know that they'd arrived. Crucial to the success of the operation was giving the impression that a much larger force had landed. So 300 parachutes filled the air over the valley, only 33 of which had men beneath them. The rest were stores for local people and arms for the partisans.
This impressive sight, dropping into the Rossano Valley, was meant to deceive the enemy into thinking a whole battalion of paratroopers had arrived. But would the fascist forces fall for this illusion? Trevor Harold is the last surviving member of the operation.
One is asked sometimes, were you scared? I don't think scaring as such came into it. You were there, you were a body of fellas, you'd volunteered for this, well, you know, let's get on with it.
The winter of 1944 was one of the worst on record, transforming the already tough terrain into a freezing landscape. The squadron were flown in through heavy cloud and treacherous winds.
This is an account of the parachute drop from the splendidly named Tinker Gibbon, who was one of the parachutists, one of the SAS guys. My parachute landed in a tree on one side of a ravine, and my kit bag landed in a tree on the other side of the ravine. So I ended up strung up like a fly. I was hanging about 30 feet above the ground, and below me was a whole crowd of what turned out to be partisans, but they were actually dressed in German uniforms, so it was an exciting few moments.
There are still people here who witnessed the parachute drop, and I'm going to meet one of them. Luigi was 10 years old at the time.
Luigi, buongiorno.
Buongiorno.
Come sta? Monty, how are you? Working hard. So Luigi, this was the valley here.
La zona quando facevano i paracadutisti, che erano gli apparecchi, facevano il giro qui e poi facevano i lanci. Certo, il paracadute se ne andava più alto, più basso. I primi tempi sì. I primi tempi si aveva un po' paura, perché non si sapevano se erano o veri partigiani o tedeschi, hai capito? E si mangiava un po' tutti perché quando buttavano giù c'erano dei secchi grossi, si staccavano dai paracaduti, picchiavano per terra e saltava via tutto. E noi altri bambini si andava tic-tac, tic-tac, tic-tac. Più di uno rimaneva attaccati a degli alberi, ma poi c'erano gli altri partigiani, la gente del popolo, qui la gente del posto, andavano, ci aiutavano a farli scendere, a tirarli giù via. E ben certo, appena sì, mi ricordo bene, mi ricordo bene tutto.
The supplies were vital to a valley that was on the brink of starvation. To suppress anti-fascist activity, the Nazis had destroyed everything they could.
You can see behind me leading down into the valley there, this is farmland. But the big problem the people here had was that the Germans operated a scorched earth policy and killed all the livestock, burnt all the crops.
Cosa avevano bruciato al paese? Qui tutto il grano. La gente aveva messo il grano dentro alle case e non l'avevano ancora battuto.
Allora eravamo scappati, io, mio fratello, mia mamma e le mie sorelle, siamo andati ai boschi sul lontano e mentre si guardava a bruciare la chiesa di Rossano, il paese.
Il paese l'hanno distrutto, fino alla canonica, hanno bruciato tutto.
But even this merciless destruction did not take away their final means of survival.
La farina di castagne ce n'era abbondanza e la gente, e anche i partigiani, l'hanno mangiato anche loro, la patona qui.
I'm about to meet local chestnut miller Giani, who was 13 when the parachutes landed in his valley.
Giovanni, buongiorno.
Buongiorno.
Come sta? I'm Monty.
Abbastanza bene.
How are you? How are you? Nice to meet you.
Se non c'era i castagni eravamo morti di fame, perché non arrivava niente da fuori.
Yeah.
I castagni ci hanno salvato la vita, ecco. Macinavamo circa 1000 quintali di castagni e le mangiavamo tutti qui nella zona.
Yeah.
Le abbiamo mangiate tutte.
Local and partisan help, combined with their deep knowledge of their environment, was critical to the success and survival of the men of Operation Galia.
Portavo da mangiare, i miei genitori mi davano una cesta con dentro da mangiare, però poi tutta la valle ha collaborato a portare da mangiare agli inglesi, non solamente la mia famiglia ma anche gli altri. Chiunque avesse trovato un italiano con che salvava gli inglesi veniva fucilato sull'istante, capisci? E noi avevamo paura.
Listening to the partisans, I realized just what an enormous risk they were taking.
Your family, Giovanni, was very brave, I think.
Sì.
Grazie mille.
Ciao, via.
Thank you, Giovanni. Lovely to meet you.
Arrivederci presto.
Yeah, ciao.
Ciao.
Within 24 hours of landing, the SAS had met their partisan help and were ready to set out from Rossano. I'm in northern Italy, following the journey of an SAS squadron conducting an operation behind enemy lines. Their mission was to attack the Nazi and fascist Italian forces, to draw them away from the Gothic Line and allow the Allies to advance.
Towards the end of 1944, the Allies had complete control of the skies. But that's not enough, and the Germans knew it. To really control an area, you need boots on the ground. The Germans also knew that there were certain routes that the Allies had to follow as they advanced north. So a diversion was essential to pull those forces away, and that's where Operation Galia came in.
We were split up to go into various different valleys through the mountains.
The full squadron divided into smaller groups that were called sticks.
6 sticks were designated to various objectives to attack any small body of enemy troops one might come across.
As soon as any news reached them of enemy patrols or a convoy of vehicles known as a column, one or more of the sticks would set out for an attack with a local guide to lead them through the mountains. An example of the kind of attacks they made is here, in the town of Pontremoli.
Now, I'm at a perfect vantage point to look at the town. I'm in the castle, and there's a reason this castle's here. This has been a bottleneck since Roman times. People have always had to come through this valley. You've got the mountains there, and you've got the mountains there. Now, the SAS had got themselves in a position where they could look down at the town. The commander of the SAS sort of swarming with enemy. He spotted that there was a river and there was a major road just here. So at dawn the next morning, they got themselves in a position where they could actually attack a bend in the road because they'd heard that there was a column coming down. Shortly after that, a column appeared. It had armoured cars in it, it had trucks with infantry on, and it had horse-drawn artillery. And they waited and waited until the column got into exactly the right position. Was absolute bedlam. They'd been in the perfect position and they hit the column really, really hard. But then they realised that cutting off their exit route was a column of enemy troops, and it was quite a large one. So the commander of the SAS thought, right, we've got to go. We've got to get out. So they disabled the 2 large machine guns, left them where they were, and headed for the hills. They actually went along the same route that they'd come in, which is a very unusual thing to do.
Attacks like this forced the Nazis to react as had been hoped. They began to divert huge numbers of troops into this area in the belief that they were being attacked in serious numbers. After Pontremoli, Commander Bob Walker-Brown and his stick retreated back to the Rossano Valley.
They managed to capture 2 German soldiers. When they interrogated them, they were told by the Germans they were looking for 400 British paratroopers using 2 brigades. This meant that thousands of men were tied up, basically looking for 33 SAS men.
But not all of the operation's attacks and ambushes went so well.
We had a guide who's only a youngster. He took us through these valleys to where our starting point was intended to be.
They'd been sent south to raid the Aula Road, but they were betrayed by an informant.
We were surrounded there by enemy troops, and that was it. They'd got us.
The notoriously violent Italian fascist Brigata Nera had captured Trevor's stick.
We were blindfolded and stood up outside, and they used clubs on you a little bit and that sort of thing. The guide who was with us, they murdered him, shot him. The indications made that they were going to get rid of us if we didn't open our mouths. Our instructions on interrogation was just to tell everybody there were sort of thousands of us rather than 33.
After 6 weeks of action, undeterred by their captured comrades, the men of Operation Galia judged their mission complete. So now they had to escape. The SAS term for which is exfiltration. And this was to be another huge challenge.
So you could argue the military part of their mission was over. They'd made the decision to exfiltrate and they needed to get over those mountains. But to do that, they needed local guides. And if I'm going to follow their route, then so do I.
A man who knows the landscape of the exfiltration well is British-born guide Kane Olsen.
How you doing?
Very well. How are you?
I'm very well.
Very well. For an espresso?
I would love for an
Right.
espresso. I genuinely think my coffee consumption in Italy has doubled.
Kane will be my guide and translator for the first part of the journey.
Kane, the story of the Freedom Trails here and the story of Operation Galia, are you aware of that story?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you grow up in Italy, I've been grew up in Italy since the age of 8, and obviously you learn that history at school as well. And living locally and learning to mountaineer in the mountains here, you're aware of that and you come across it all the time. Coincidentally, my granddad, he was a parachute instructor, and it could be that he trained some of these SAS men that were involved in the Operation
Well, really,
Galia.
the actual guys who dropped in?
Yeah.
Wow. So you have a particularly close and rather poignant connection to all this.
Kane talks me through our route that follows the track of the SAS.
You can get a bit of a false impression from looking at a route on a map. It doesn't look too...
Definitely.
Too bad.
It's all flat on the map.
Yeah. And this just as a mountaineering challenge.
Oh, yeah, it's serious mountaineering. I mean, still today, mountaineers come from all over the world to climb here.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Excellent. Yeah. I'm in your capable hands.
The first part of the SAS exfiltration route takes us to the river Magna.
The classic route through this part of Italy is called the Alta Via, and it's been in use probably since Roman times, certainly since Napoleonic times. But the SAS knew that was too heavily patrolled. They'd get discovered if they took the Alta Via. So they had to stay in the valleys, the forests, to try and stay hidden. And that route brought them to this river. Okay.
Right.
A moment of truth.
We don't know if they actually crossed here, but they definitely crossed in a safe point, right, where they didn't have to, get in danger by being too deep and being washed away.
Of course, it was middle of winter.
Yeah. So this sort of situation here was, very probably a crossing point because it's like a natural bridge.
But a point of maximum vulnerability for them because, of course, when you cross a river, you're totally out in the open. You're totally exposed, and they'd been moving under cover.
Exactly, yeah. And here they would have been open in the open air, and they could have been seen. And in fact, you can just see over there, you see above the tree line on the left?
Yeah.
That is the castle of Aulla, and that was a Nazi fascist stronghold. So they had to cross at night because they knew that they would have been watched from that castle.
Right under the nose of the Germans.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, should we go for it?
Go for it, yeah. All right, careful, because it's pretty slippery.
OK, no problem. I'm hot on your heels. Fair old current as well.
Yeah.
Woo!
OK?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. If I go in, you'll definitely know about it.
Be a big splash.
Yeah. You may learn some new words. Middle of the night, freezing cold, exhausted.
Freezing cold water.
Yeah, when you're physically at a low ebb anyway.
Yeah.
The strength of the current meant that the mules they'd brought with them to carry their supplies had to be abandoned at the banks of the river. From this point, they took only their carbine rifles and 1 tin of bully beef each for the rest of the journey.
Really? Almost. Nearly face planted.
All right, done it.
We've done it. It's a triumph.
Well done.
Yeah, thank you. Very good. Cheers. It's a triumph. I don't think I've ever seen a river so full of trout as this one.
After the river crossing, the SAS had to move stealthily through the occupied countryside. And on their route lay the isolated mountain town of Vinka. As the town was a natural staging post for escaping allies and partisans travelling through, there was also a strong chance that the enemy lay in wait. I'm following the exfiltration route of the SAS men from Operation Galia in the deep winter of early 1945. Arriving at Vinka at the foothills of the Marble Mountains, they were exhausted from weeks of constant action in enemy-occupied territory.
When Bob Walker-Brown led the patrol up here, his intention was to move through the valley and go up that re-entrant there and up and over the mountains.
They found the local inhabitants terrified.
6 months prior to the SAS arriving here, this had been the scene of an absolutely horrendous massacre. The Germans already knew that Vinka was being used as a staging post to get people over the mountains and also as a base for partisans. And indeed, in the months leading up to the massacre, there were a couple of partisan raids in the local area. And that was enough. The Germans decided to make an example of Vinka. And using Italian fascist forces, they surrounded the village, closed in, and conducted something called a rastrellamento, which translates as a raking. Okay, what was the makeup of the group that actually assaulted the village?
There were 3 groups of people: the German Nazis, the Italian fascists, and then there was a group that is not often talked about of cowards.
Cowards.
Yeah. So locals.
And they are the people to fear, aren't they? They're the people, they've sided with the strong, and they'll do anything. There's nothing more frightening than a frightened man, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Come si chiama lei, signora? Come si chiama?
Io mi chiamo Cagnoli Erminia.
Erminia. Mi stava raccontando prima di quei giorni brutti.
Ho saltato un muretto alto così, sono andata nell'aia, poi sono andata dietro alla porta, ma facevo così dalla paura. Non ci voglio nemmeno pensare. Io sono andata per terra, avevo 9 anni.
This wasn't a long time ago. It's happened recently, and there are people walking around this village who witnessed it and survived it and carry the mental scars to this day. Like this lady here, you know, 9-year-old kid.
The enemy returned each day for 3 days, waiting for those to come out of hiding. The oldest was 98. And the youngest was 2 days old.
Che non si dovrebbe più sentir dire di queste cose fino che il mondo dura. Perché noi qui l'abbiamo pagata cara, veramente. Nonno e mia nonna materni, la sorella di mio babbo e suo marito, che erano i miei zii, 4 cugine, e poi, se si fa il conto, sono una quindicina i parenti, cioè i parenti della mia famiglia che sono stati ammazzati.
We're with Andrea Cortieri, who wants to show us a monument the town built to commemorate the massacre.
Che oramai siamo troppo giovani per affrontare tante cose, poi non si rimane bene, non si riesce più a mantenersi. E purtroppo queste cose ci danno ancora tanto. Certe cose non possono esistere al mondo.
Of the 174 civilians slaughtered here at Vinka, 144 were women and children.
Una mamma col bimbino, c'era una mamma con 2 bimbini maschi e femmina, e poi c'era un'altra mamma con una bambina. Come dire, quando poi siamo rientrati a casa, che lì dove ora mia figlia c'era come una piaggia, diciamo. Loro avevano messo la metraglia là, le donne le mettevano qui vicino al muro e cacciavano così. E questa riferisce alla mamma che aveva il bambino in braccio, e insomma dopo.
It is very, very important to reflect on what happened here.
this was a massacre, an entire village gone. And the eyewitnesses to that massacre will soon be gone as well. They're very old men and very old women now. And with their passing, it's so important that it's remembered. And one of the reasons is in the modern world, we see the rise of extremism, we see the rise of far-right thinking. And is it really that long a journey from where we are now to another Vinka, to where I'm standing? And I think that's maybe one of the only ways that something like this can possibly have value or possibly have meaning, is if a current generation remember what happened here. The men of Operation Galia continued on their exfiltration, up into the mountains beyond, walking through ever higher terrain, ever closer to the Gothic Line. At the base of the Marble Mountains, I meet my next guide, Cristiano. Just as the SAS would, a new local guide familiar to each part of the route. I'm in safe hands with Chris, a professional mountaineer who has reached the peaks of Monti Altisimo many times before.
Salute.
Cheers.
Salute.
Salute.
So where are we on here?
We are here. We are close to Gothic Line.
Commander Bob Walker-Brown said that the route they'd been told to take was less of a route and more of a gap between enemy posts.
They were at their lowest ebb, and this was their point of maximum peril. But they had no choice. They just had to go for it. I can't wait, Chris. I'm really looking forward to it. I don't like heights. I'm a bit frightened of heights, but,
no.
you know.
Don't be afraid.
Yeah. So this is your home turf?
Yeah.
Well, it's very nice for me to do this trek with someone who comes from here.
Yeah.
Same as the SAS guys did. They used local people, you know. Local people knew these mountains.
Yes.
Because they'd always worked here.
Yes.
Right here, where we're walking, was once the Gothic Line. It's hard to imagine now, but there would have been layer after layer of heavy weaponry and fortification.
Chris has just told a very interesting story. His wife's family were fascists. And after the war, there were recriminations, and many of his wife's family were killed. This, a great expression, is a civilian war. This was a civilian war. Not necessarily a war between armies, but a war between people within cities, within towns, within villages, and within families. And it divided Italy.
In this area operates German soldiers and Italian soldiers, and the division of fascists was called Monte Rosa.
Monte Rosa. The Italian fascists are often more vicious than the Germans.
Yeah. The civilians hate them.
The civilians hated them?
Yeah. Here there are also SS troops.
So, Chris, they had their best troops here, really?
Yeah, because German troops knows that if the Gothic Line breaks down, the war was finished.
It was finished for them. This was a last stand.
The Gothic Line here represented a final barrier between victory and defeat.
The men had been on the run for 4 days by now when they got to the mountains. And they faced many, many hazards here. But one of them, and one of the main ones, was mines. The Germans mined all the main tracks, but they also mined off the tracks. And of course, this was covered in deep snow, so they just had to hope they got lucky and just keep pushing towards the ridges.
Chris and I finally reach the midpoint of the mountain, and the terrain changes as we reach the first of the ridges.
Fantastic.
Look at that. This is your office.
Yes, yes.
That is extraordinary. And the marble mines, look at that, a great chunk taken out of the bite, taken out of that mountain.
These mountains are known throughout the world for the stunning marble that is quarried from their sheer cliffs. For thousands of years, people have mined and carved the stone, from the Pantheon in Rome to Michelangelo's David.
So this would have been the realm of Germans, Italian fascists.
Yes.
So this wasn't freedom.
No, the freedom is over the other ridge.
So they had to go, go a long way up.
Ahead of the SAS lay the most difficult part of this climb, the high ridges of Monti Altisimo. I'm following the journey of an SAS exfiltration through the heavily fortified marble mountains of northern Italy during World War II.
If you consider for a moment what these men were taking on when they started to climb the precipitous face of Monti Altisimo. They'd been in theatre on the operation for 50 days, with the Germans snapping at their heels the entire time. They were physically, utterly debilitated. The winter of 1944 was one of the worst on record. There was snow 2 or 3 meters deep, so as they headed into the mountains from Vinka, they weren't just facing this escape and evasion, being chased by the enemy. Ahead of them, they had a really formidable mountaineering challenge.
We've now reached the knife-like ridges of Monti Altisimo, which I have to admit, even on a summer's day, appear daunting.
So, Chris, we've hit a slightly sort of steeper section. It's not climbing this, is it? But you need to protect yourself when you scramble here.
Yeah, because it's not difficult, but it's dangerous. And so we need the rope. If you fall, I can take it.
And to give this context, the guys, when they did this, and when the partisans and people came over, they didn't have all this stuff, did they? You know, one slip, whoosh, you're gone.
I'm genuinely scared of heights, something I'm happy to admit, but somewhat reluctant to test.
All right, I keep the rope tight.
Yeah.
Okay. If I stop, you have to stop.
Of course. Yeah.
Chris is like a mountain goat, whereas I have what can only be described as shaky trouser.
See, we have a big gap here, Chris.
Yeah.
A big, like, keyhole.
Yeah.
Well, they used to lay tripwires across things like this, and the patrol actually set a tripwire off and a flare. But there was no one watching, so they were okay. So you had to be really careful about things like this.
Monti Altisimo rises for over 5,000 feet and is known for its steep southwest face, which drops near vertically to the valley below.
All right, you are safe.
Very good. That's the hardest I've concentrated for about 4 years.
Cristiano takes me to the other side of the ridgeline of Monti Altisimo, and finally we're heading downhill again.
There was to be one final act in the extraordinary drama that was Operation Galia. As the SS moved along this ridge, they suddenly saw a German patrol, and the German patrol saw them. and they got ready for battle. And then the two groups just passed each other and did nothing. Maybe you get to a point of fatigue, or just you're tired of the war and you decide enough is enough and you just let things go.
Spotting an American platoon just before dawn, the squadron had reached Allied territory and were proud to discover that none of their comrades had broken under interrogation.
So you think, Chris?
Yeah.
You think this was it?
Yes.
This gully down here is where they went. I can see the road.
Yeah.
And you're down into the woods, aren't you?
Yeah.
So you can move down using the branches.
Yeah.
Yeah, much easier. So there it is, that's Rossano, journey's end. The Allies held Rossano and Serovica further on. Well, look, it's been a great day.
Yeah.
Journey's end. Thank you, Chris. You've done so well for me today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You've looked after me very well, and I'm going to lead you now to a beer.
Yeah.
We're going to a
Great
beer.
leader.
Yes, that's right. I'm a man on a mission.
Trevor and his stick were held prisoner for 4 months until they were liberated by the Allies and could finally head back to Britain. The rest of Operation Galia returned to the UK, where, after only a short recovery, they were sent on new missions. Before leaving Italy, for me, there's one last meeting. John Redhead has been retracing his father's wartime story, and it's led him to a local family.
He looks a very dashing figure,
Yeah.
your dad, I must say.
He was in the Second World War. He was a CMP, Corps of Military Police.
Yeah.
And on a few occasions, he was prisoner of war, and he escaped on a few occasions as well. On one occasion, I think they were going to shoot him in a lineup of a firing squad. Somebody came up at last minute and says, "We're not going to shoot English people today." So he got let off with his friend. They shot the other people. And in the meantime, that night, he escaped and came up into the mountains, probably to where we are now.
John and I are heading to the village of Deccio, where John's father, Tom, took refuge with a family.
And maybe I'm fulfilling what he would like to have done.
Yes, I'm sure.
So it's a lovely thing to do, really.
It is. It's a pilgrimage.
Absolutely.
John.
OK.
Let's go.
Yeah.
You all right?
Yeah, no, yeah. it's
a few butterflies?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good evening.
Hello, how are you?
Pretty good, thanks.
Buongiorno. Buongiorno. Monty. And this is John.
Quella somiglia,
You're
è alta
Beatrice?
parecchio.
Beatrice?
Yes,
Beatrice?
and the littlest one,
Jean.
Jean.
Ah.
Jen is my mother, and Bisce is Tekla's mother.
Vieni. Proprio ci facevano una tenerezza questi poveri figlioli, si pensava ai nostri che erano in guerra, che erano prigionieri, qualcuno li guarderà almeno.
Do you remember Tom? Do you remember
Te
him?
lo ricordi?
I remember very well.
Se
He
Tom me
was
lo
the
ricordo
nicest
benissimo.
guy we had.
Really?
Two German soldiers, they were sleeping in the kitchen floor. 7 prisoners we had upstairs.
No.
But they were very brave.
No, coraggiosi e incoscienti.
Not courageous. They were just, you know, they were
Crazy.
young.
Crazy.
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 Crazy. Can we look round the house? Would you mind if we look?
Sure, you go on in. They told the two Germans there's very sick people upstairs, contagious.
Oh, right.
So they didn't go
clever.
upstairs.
Yes.
Clever.
Ah.
Yeah.
And so this is where they put them
And lock the door.
and locked the door.
He did tell me about a room that he was hiding in. This is the room.
Yeah, this is it for sure.
This is amazing.
Do you know the remarkable thing about that is after these close shaves, these things that these near misses, Germans being downstairs, coming in for food while prisoners are upstairs, at no point did the family throw the prisoners out. At no point say, no, this is too much, too dangerous. And it's a real badge of honor that the family carries, I think.
Tom fosse qui oggi.
Sì, se Tom fosse qui oggi sarei contentissima, sarei contenta di riabbracciarlo, ma non lo so cosa gli potrei fare dalla contentezza, non lo so. Forse mi sarei tenere e contenere a modo. Farei cose da farci, lo stritolerei.
To put their lives on the line, to look after people that they only just met. They really cared for these people. And it's just amazing.
Perfect. Excellent.
Grazie molto.
Thank you. Just thank you for looking after me, Dad.
Grazie.
And everything that you did.
Mio padre.
I might not have been here if it wasn't for you people.
E se non era per voi, forse non ero qui.
Thank you.
Maybe
you.
yes, maybe no.
Yes, well, maybe not.
Siamo molto contenti di averlo fatto.
We're very happy
E
to
lo
have
rifarei
done
anche ora.
Very
it. And I
brave.
would do it again today.
Very brave. Thank you.
Lovely to meet you. You're amazing.
Thank you.
And fantastic hair. The men of Operation Galia were hailed as heroes, their journey the stuff of legend. However, the war in northern Italy fighting fascism was fought by many right up to this exact ridgeline. This might seem a military story, but actually there were civilians at every stage risking their lives to make this happen. The heroism of ordinary local people here cannot be underestimated. In supporting, sheltering and helping Allied escapees and troops, they risked everything. Something that should never be forgotten.